Welcome to the HITea With Grace podcast, where we spill the tea on HIT. I'm thrilled to be here at the ViVE conference with friend and founding partner and CEO at Kepler Team, Olga Muller. Olga, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about the career path that brought you to your role today.
It didn't start as for many other people by going through a professional career and taking one position at a time. I kind of somewhat fell into entrepreneurship, even though it was ultimately destined. Way back then, I actually grew up in Russia and graduated with a degree in applied mathematics and computer science. And actually, my track was in healthcare and specifically learning to improve diagnostics with functional systems, using statistical methods to do better, like multi-factor correlation, all those things to use technology to improve outcomes. At the time I graduated, I found out nobody really needed my knowledge. Nobody was ready for that. And so I had a completely different path, taking different jobs, and ended up in the United States about 25 years ago, and still doing anything from math teaching to running marketing agencies to actually doing a little bit on the business side. But when I ended up in technology, the life works in mysterious ways. So I ended up running a business, and I ended up first running a business of just the technology side of it, where we did a lot of product development. And then we repivoted, and this is when I really started my own company. There were many reasons for why I wanted to have better control over what was happening and how things were done. And whether that's me being a woman and always looking for ways to improve things, and good enough is never good enough. And ended up with a partner who really, we started doing a lot of nonprofit work and doing a lot of event organizing in Charlotte, North Carolina. And her name is also Olga. And we ended up starting our own company and choosing specifically at that point to only be in healthcare. And it's funny that I looked at it maybe a year or two back and thinking, this is exactly what I wanted to do when I graduate. And here I am, changing the world of healthcare with technology.
I love it. So what does Kepler Team really focus on?
Like I said, we started as the product team. So we were helping startups, for the most part, develop their products. And we really excelled at that. And we developed our own design patterns and our own methodology that's now called 4096. That includes many different components of what it takes to really build quality products and not to waste time and money. And then at the next iteration, number one, we embraced the idea of what is the least amount of code you can create in order to get something started. Instead of the best code, it was about really to get to the point A to point B. It's not necessarily means to create a lot of code. A lot of times it's just finding what's already on the market and bring it together and have this multi-component MVP.
Fantastic. I really want to learn from you today about how you're helping your clients with interoperability. So Why is interoperability such an important topic for digital health startups? And what are the key challenges they need to be aware of early on?
So this was one of those subjects. The reason we actually even invested and created our own little product is what I saw is startups a lot of times develop those beautiful, let's say, care extension products, digital health products. And yet we all heard that when you come as a point solution to healthcare system, nobody wants to talk to you. And we saw that over and over again, and even the best solutions struggle to launch or sometimes even die because they don't get that early on clinical adoption. Nobody wants to give them a try because the key word in healthcare is workflow. If you're not extension of someone's workflow, you're just another point solution, and physicians have to spend so much time trying to log in and learn something else. So when people ask about why is it important, because basically it may cost you business if you're not part of that workflow.
What are the biggest myths about EHR integrations? And what are the hard facts that startups really need to know?
The myths mostly evolve around the fact that integration is always perceived as something that's difficult and It may be, and it's long, it's costly, it's something that we shouldn't be thinking of until we are ready. And that ready may be entirely different pathway. For some people, ready may take a year. And at that point, the business may become irrelevant. So again, that early adoption is the key to success to many startups, especially at early stage. And one thing that we see is, honestly, the integrations do not have to be very difficult if you approach them in a phase manner, instead of trying to integrate everything and both ways. Integration can be as simple as using what's public API providing, using that FHIR interface to really pull the data and make it as simple as possible for physicians. And then next step, you start thinking, what is your integration plan? What is your integration project is going to look like? Now, in 6 months, in a year, it's going to be entirely different.
Compliance obviously is a huge challenge here. And is that a major barrier for startups entering healthcare? And how should startups approach compliance without slowing down that innovation?
It can be. Obviously, ideal, there are the golden standards. There is SOC 2, there is high trust. Depending on the business model and how the PHI data handled, obviously, those compliant requirements could be very different. What we like to do is sit down with startups and go over, okay, let's talk about what compliance looks like for you now. Let's say, do you have to be fully HIPAA compliant? Most likely the answer is yes. But what does it mean at different stages, and who should be handling information and how, could really be dependent on the business. Yes, you want to integrate into healthcare system, you have to be compliant at least to some level. And again, that level could be defined, number one, by healthcare system itself, number two, by the business model, and number three, really by how the business is currently operating, what needs to happen. And sometimes it's just a couple of tweaks. Sometimes it is about implementing a platform. There are so many solutions nowadays that allow to just bring in a very specific framework, a platform to the business. And some of them are relatively affordable for startups, and have them handle all the difficult questions. You'll find the answers to them, you fill in the forms, and a few months later, you may be fully SOC 2 compliant. At HIPAA, it may take 2 to 3 months, that's all.
Wow. It's interesting because I hear from a lot of startups that they often feel like a bee around these big EHR vendors, just buzzing around and annoying them and stepping on their toes. What happens when a startup gets too close to competing with them that they don't want to integrate with them, and how can companies navigate the unwritten rules of working with those dominant players in the space?
So there are different ways to approach it. I would say, yes, I witnessed a couple of situations where startups truly did get into competition with, let's say, bigger EHR with some of the functionality where the overlap was too significant. So far, I haven't seen it end well for startups. It is what it is. We have all these systems and they have better resources. And I would say, until you're ready, just try to see where those overlaps are and try to minimize those. Maybe find a way to collaborate instead of straightforward compete. Because, let's say, large EHRs can refuse the access to private APIs if they find that competition is too close. Again, we've witnessed some of the recent misunderstandings, right, between, and again, the particle health now has that issue with Epic, and we don't really talk a lot about what's happening in that world, but the truth is, startups are small companies, large EHRs are big companies. We all know when someone is trying to take over and try and compete with the larger companies. Unless you have resources, there are ways to collaborate instead of compete, and try and do that.
So how do you do it? Like, how do you find those ways to collaborate? What are the typical kind of ways that you've seen work well?
For example, if you have the functionality that's, let's say, overlaps with MyChart, instead of building something to replace it, try and use the APIs. Maybe try and find some way of how maybe a better wrapper can still include that piece inside of that workflow instead of just try to cut it out. Again, maybe one day they'll grow and see, and maybe you'll be able to replace. But then again, we don't talk about it. We try and sell on the idea of how you can improve outcomes by utilizing existing framework and system.
Like having an instance that just works well and complements their system versus competing with it. Fascinating. Yes. So if interoperability is a solved problem on paper, a lot of people say, oh, we've got interoperability right now. It's not a technical problem, right? It's a cultural problem or whatever they want to say, or it's a clinical data problem. But why is it still one of the biggest bottlenecks in digital health? And what's keeping that problem alive?
And there are different ways to look at it. There's technical, there's philosophical, right? We know interoperability matter came out in the first place. There are very reasonable concerns about data privacy, about data integrity, many different things. And yet we feel that even as we have a job because interoperability doesn't work out of the box. And anytime you come to the hospital to do integration, you have to work with EHR team members, you have to work with hospital team members, you have to open the right ports, you have to request access to certain APIs, unless they're very basic public APIs, right? Again, there are reasons for why EHR systems want to keep that integrity of data and ensure that it remains in the vault, so to say. Of course, modern technologies, I feel, can overcome that problem. There's a little bit of misunderstanding on how those technologies work and what really makes the data accessible. Now we have all of these formats, we have all of this newer. FHIR makes things easier, but then again, we have all of this idea of putting the data in one source. Again, does it make it more secure? Probably not. There's a lot of conversations about whether blockchain is going to be a game changer. And yet, those conversations by now, I'd say I heard them about 4 to 5 years for the first time, and they're still at the level of conversation. I feel like there is a political component that probably still plays one of the major roles in there. And until we realize that everybody's interested in that problem to be truly solved and not just talk about it, there will be the reasons why it's not solved.
Very interesting. I just love your insights, Olga. And that's why you're my friend, because I know you know what's up, right? Thank you.
Pretty much, yes.
Our listeners love to learn from women leaders in the industry about what's going on in the space, but they also love to learn about you as a leader. I'm wondering, in your personal life, as you're building this company and you're working your hardest, what are things that you do to work your best and make a difference?
Honestly, when you're a small company and you have people that depend on you, to me, that was one of the realizations where as there are many things that you can do as a person and you cannot do as a leader. And sometimes your decision-making has to come from that place where you ask yourself a question. As a person, does it make sense? Now, as a leader, does it still make sense? And there is this layered accountability, so to say. You have things that you owe to your family, you have things that you owe to yourself, you have things that you owe to the people you work with. The thing is, when you let one thing guide you and not all the things guide you, that's when you either find yourself in a severe burnout space where we all know you put the mask on you before you put it on others, right? If you don't have that space to put the mask on you and to breathe through things, then you really can't help others. But another thing I've embraced over the last maybe 3 years that were extremely turbulent on and off in a different way is to have that mentality where when challenges hit you, I'm a technologist, so obviously every technologist that played games at some point. And as you play a game, you get to the next level and then the challenges get bigger. But that's how you know you got to the next level, right? So I kind of embraced that across my team, where whenever we see that bigger challenges hit us, we go, guys, I guess we grew. We made it to the next level. Congratulations. Now we have to learn how to breathe through that. When people ask, is it going to get better? No, it won't. You can't grow without that attitude of overcoming challenges is what helps you grow. You adjust things. There are always pointers to what you can improve. What are the ideas, how you can still become better? And again, you can't be a leader if you don't help others grow. And that's one of the things. You can't grow the company if you can't grow your people. To me, especially that we have that service component, my people are my company. really, if I don't invest in them, then nothing else makes sense. So it becomes important to understand and ask these questions. What is the culture around you? Does it make sense? Do people feel like working with you? Do people feel like being these contributing team members and not just employees? And it does take that shift. And I guess if you don't emanate what you believe in, then it's difficult for people to believe in that.
So many amazing, just so much amazing wisdom there. And I feel so inspired right now. Expect the challenges and yet hope for the best, right? And see those challenges as opportunities. It's a really great sentiment. I love that. If you could talk to your younger self, what piece of advice would you give her?
I was very lucky that when I was younger, there was very early in my career, there was a woman who gave me a chance. I came to her with some ridiculous idea how I'm going to take over all the processes in the company because I was tired of taking data from one department to another and manually entering it. And instead of asking me, who the heck are you? She actually gave me a chance to do that. And I pretty much completed my task to my own surprise. Now I'm looking at it like, what the heck were you thinking? But honestly, I believe that everything that happens to us in life happens for a reason. Every challenge we overcome happens to make us, to guide us on our path if we just follow that. So to me, the only advice I could give to myself is really don't be afraid to act. Just remember, be who you are. And that's what I always try to do. When people ask me, what is one thing you could change? I could change the fact that my dad died, but I can't change that. Those are the things that, what could I change about my path and my own decisions? Thank goodness I made all of my mistakes. Thank goodness I screwed up so many times because that taught me and made me who I am.
It's almost like you have to be courageous to screw up.
Exactly.
To take a risk.
Yes,
shows you're taking risks.
Don't be afraid to take risks. Yes, that's one thing. And I would say, just follow your heart.
I love it. You know our listeners would love to find you online after this. Where's the best way for them to look you up?
Probably LinkedIn. Like most of us, right? This is the one tool that we all use.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining us today. We just love learning from you, and I hope you have an awesome ViVE.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I hope you do too.
And thanks to you folks for joining us too. Check out the HITea With Grace podcast for more great interviews with esteemed guests like Olga today. Cheers.
Like a Girl Media is more than a media network. It's a community. We want to meet you and amplify your voice and the voices of outstanding women innovating in healthcare. Interested in starting your own podcast or hosting an event near you? Connect with us online or in person. We're here to support and empower you.